Hello everybody and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. Dr. Joseph Mercola is the topic of today's video clip. He's a medical doctor who operates one of the biggest health-related websites in the US, maybe in the world, I don't know. He's an osteopathic physician. He advertises himself as an advocate for alternative health and alternative medicine, and his site offers books and supplements, devices, and other health-related products. I don't really care about that. What I want to talk about is what he talks about and the validity of it. Like a lot of health professionals, some of what he says is accurate and factually sound, but he also endorses a lot of very marginal people, products, and protocols. And he clearly does not like plant-based diets or the people who promote them. There is an article posted on his website titled "The Dark Side of the China Study Supporting Veganism." It's a very long rant about why Colin, Campbell, and others who recommend a plant-based diet are wrong. No references, this is kind of par for the course for Mercola, there are no references to back up the things that he says in this very, very long article. Now, Dr. Campbell often chooses not to respond to these kinds of things because it's usually a waste of time, and I agree. I think it gives these people way too much attention. There aren't enough hours in the day to address all of the senseless and unsupported information that's distributed to the public. But in this particular case, and this goes back a few years, I've updated a few things, Dr. Campbell decided to respond. And I'm glad he did, because Mercola's messages are mostly wrong, but his site is incredibly popular and reaches a lot of people, which means that he's hard to ignore, and a lot of our people come across his website and become very confused after they read it. So this article is going to feature some excerpts from Dr. Campbell's formal response, which may be helpful for people who are trying to sort out the truth from fiction. I think that the article, even though it was written, the excerpts were written some time ago, they still have a great deal of relevance. And because this rant of his about Campbell and plant-based diets is still posted on the website. Now I have some additional commentary, and I've noted which statements are attributable to Dr. Campbell and which are attributable to me. So I'll start with Dr. Campbell. He says, Dr. Mercola's main business model is nutritional typing. In some way, we're supposed to listen to our body to determine which of 3 dietary types best suit us. He then becomes more specific as to the importance of eating certain foods in the right order and the right type, and he says that his recommendations are science-based. Dr. Campbell says this is a really clever strategy for positioning himself in the marketplace because he casts such a broad net. He describes the 3 different diet groups as the high-carb, low-fat types, the low-carb, high-fat types, and then those in between. Those are the 3. So essentially what he's done is he's built a way that everybody can be a customer of his program. So, that reaches a large customer base. Now, I'll make this comment here. I recently wrote an article about coconut oil, which you guys who are regular subscribers I'm sure watched, and I reviewed the information on Mercola's site about coconut oil. Now, he's an advocate for coconut oil, and this nutritional typing strategy is used to explain how to incorporate coconut oil in the diet. He discusses protein types and carbohydrate types, and he says that's how people can figure out what to do with coconut oil. He says if coconut oil makes you nauseous or sick, you should eat less of it, and you might be more of a carbohydrate type. So back to Dr. Campbell again. I mean, he's still using this. The point is he's still using this silly strategy to tell people what to do. So Dr. Campbell now says, I deeply respect our personal freedoms to do as we wish as long as it doesn't hurt people. But given the complex environment within which we choose foods, I can't understand how we can reliably determine which dietary patterns and order of eating foods is best for long-term health. I know that some people can recognize specific food allergies, but I know that we all tend to choose food for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is convenience and pleasure or gratification. And Dr. Campbell references the book called The Pleasure Trap, written by Dr. Lyle and Dr. Goldhammer, which explains why so many of us, in spite of what we know, choose foods that are really not in our best interests. So Dr. Campbell goes on to say that Mercola says this is all based on science, but Dr. Campbell would like to see the evidence. He says, I see none. To say that we can determine with any certainty which nutritional type, based on our personal but very nebulous assessment of our metabolism, is hokey pokey. On his claims about science, Dr. Campbell says, Mercola is out of his element, way out. He excuses his failure to document his professional experiences in the scientific literature because he and several of his compatriots don't have time in their busy practice of medicine, as if public documentation of evidence is a bit of a luxury that's really not that important. This is an extremely lame excuse, Dr. Campbell says, exposing his fundamental misunderstanding of what scientific validity really means. Scientific evidence, as accepted by virtually everyone, is that which represents proper scientific experimental design and publication in the peer-reviewed literature. Doing and reporting on peer-reviewed research may not be a perfect solution for establishing truths, nothing is, but it is infinitely superior than having somebody just tell you their opinions and thoughts and then taking those as fact. There's no way to evaluate claims if you refuse to expose or subject your claims to some type of scientific scrutiny. Anyone like Mercola, who claims scientific validity for his personal or professional observations, is really at liberty to say almost anything he or she wants to say if there's no mandate to actually back it up with any type of research. So Campbell goes on to say his second point involves the idea that Mercola promotes that our individual differences in metabolism make it possible for us to determine which foods please our metabolism and guard against future ailments. And Campbell says this represents a profound misunderstanding of metabolism, which changes and responds continuously and is an enormously complex system of digestion and absorption, transport, enzymatic synthesis and breakdown of intermediates, and distribution, excretion, and storage of metabolites. All of this goes on in an effort to keep the body in what we call homeostasis. Reducing this concept to a single phenomenon of energy use, which we can assess for ourselves, is more superficial than adjectives can describe. Now, this is where it gets very interesting, and I think this is maybe the most important part. Mercola dismisses, this is Dr. Campbell talking, my professional capabilities to assess diet and health evidence and to make dietary recommendations because I'm not a practicing physician and I don't have real-world experience. Dr. Campbell says I probably should ignore this insulting comment. But this is a strategy that is used all the time by people who don't want to talk about science. Instead of talking about the science, they'll talk about the individual, and it is often the statement that's made is like, if you're not in this particular field, then you're not qualified to read the scientific literature about this particular condition. I mean, the science is the science, the data are the data, and if you know how to read the data, it doesn't really matter what the topic is. So this is a ludicrous thing. So Dr. Campbell says, I never claimed I'm a practicing physician, and I've repeatedly stated that I rely on outstanding physicians like Dr. Campbell Esselstyn and a growing group of other doctors who have validated a lot of the material and research that Campbell has done. Campbell says his 20-plus years as a member, participant of several major national and international food and health policy reports also provided a very rich experience in developing dietary recommendations. Campbell goes on to say that he checked in PubMed to see if Mercola had ever published a research article, and he had not one. He had written some letters to the editor, which aren't peer-reviewed. That is contrasted with Dr. Campbell, who has published over 350 articles in the peer-reviewed literature. Now, Mercola's comments, along with others like him, is that research is flawed, Campbell's research is flawed, because he used correlations to prove causation in the China project, and it's dead wrong. And in fact, Dr. Campbell says that it's pretty clear that these people have never read his book, and I agree, because I actually went to the book to find this because I remembered reading it. He makes these statements in the China study. On page 106, he says, do I think that the China study findings constitute absolute scientific proof? Of course not. Does it provide enough information to inform practical decision making? Absolutely. And then he says at the end of the day, the strength and consistency of the majority of the evidence is enough to draw valid conclusions. And so what he says in the book, and he says it in the beginning and he makes the point several times, is that the China study is, well, first of all, it's just one chapter in the book. And it's only one project. It may be the biggest project he was involved in, but he was involved in so many others. And that the way that he arrived at his current opinions about nutrition happened over a very long period of time based on a whole lot of research done by him and other individuals and meeting doctors who were using these types of diets in their practices, etc. So Campbell goes on to say, I'm beginning to doubt the ability of Mercola's and his kind to read such material. Mercola is grossly wrong on several accounts, and quite frankly, he borders on intentional slander, because I have good reason to believe that he already saw my responses, but nonetheless prays out the same old questions without acknowledging those responses. So anyway, I won't read all of this to you. The article's long, and it'll be posted in the Health Base Library, but A couple more points. Mercola asserts that we're all biologically different individuals, and people like to find out that they're special. And also, it's true, we are pretty different. But what does this really mean? In no way does this mean that each individual or each likely disease event responds differently to very different diets. It only means that we can respond in the same direction with the same diet and lifestyle patterns, but to different degrees based on our genetics and our individual biology. Our society, and Campbell finishes with this, and I think this is really an important point. He says, our society has serious health problems and people are looking for serious advice. Mercola and others of the Atkins stripe believe that we're biologically different. We therefore require unique dietary patterns and lifestyles that represent a broad spectrum of possibilities. Now let's face it, that's what Campbell's saying in this whole piece is that this is a marketing game. And basically, if you're telling people do anything you want, and you can justify it based on your metabolic type, your nutritional type, and all the other silly things he talks about but refuses to document, then everybody likes it. I mean, I would love to have somebody develop the chocolate diet and tell me I can eat as much as I want. Good news about the bad habits is always very welcome. And so essentially, and then of course, Mercola and his colleagues never fail to advocate that a diet high in protein, fat, and cholesterol are not only acceptable but advisable for most people, and that's why Mercola promotes the coconut oil. That's part of his high-fat diet plan, unless you're a carbohydrate type, and then you don't eat the coconut oil. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The Mercolanites make the audacious claim that this is science-based when in fact almost none of these people have any understanding of scientific research and essentially no evidence of actually doing any scientific research. And by the way, the key here, if Mercola didn't do research on his claims, and I think he should, because if you want to make an audacious claim that's kind of out there and different, Campbell did. Animal protein could be a cancer promoter. He spent 40, 50 years of his life doing research. That's what Mercola should do. But if you can't do that, then you start citing information from the medical literature that documents his point, and he never does. All right. So in a marketing sense, all of this works really well because while people remain uncertain about their best healthcare practices, they become a big market for pills and potions and supplements and gadgets and silly ideas and special diets. Makes a lot of people financially rich and leaves people in terms of health very poor. And Campbell says, I worry that this would-be scientific group are continuing to bilk the public while they fatten their wallets. Because harsh words are now being spoken with increasing frequency about my ideas and my person, I must respond briefly about my motives for pursuing what I have found to be remarkably healthy for virtually all people for a wide variety of ailments. I spent more than 50 years in the diet and health research and policy communities using taxpayer money. My only motive at this time of my life is to tell taxpayers who generously supported our work what we did with their money. I feel this responsibility very deeply. I have no products to sell. I only want to do my part as honestly as I can to help resolve some very serious health problems. I doubt that I will ever again, Dr. Campbell says, answer such self-serving diatribes, for they divert me from other, more productive projects. I have no doubt that the message in our book, and told in many other books by my physician colleagues, is finally beginning to resonate with a lot of people. Mercola and his friends have lamented why so many people continue to embrace the message in our book, and the best answer I can give is very simple. In addition to being consistent with the preponderance of the scientific evidence, it works. Readers tell readers, and book sales continue to mount. And I will make a note here that the China study has sold over 1 million copies. And I don't think Mercola's ever written a book that sold 1 million copies. I'm not even sure he's written a book. I don't think he's ever written a well-referenced article, but that's beside the point. Okay, so my closing comments about this, and this is coming from me, not from Dr. Campbell. The response from Dr. Campbell only addresses Mercola's comments about him and his work in the China study. But it is a great example of the fact that Mercola chooses not to use science in making many of his diet and health-related recommendations, and his refusal to back up most of his claims with published articles and or original research speaks volumes, and perhaps this type of information will reduce some of the enthusiasm for his information. Once in a while I get emails from people, well, I shouldn't say once in a while, I get them every day, and here's a typical thing that somebody will say. I don't know if you read this book by so-and-so about XYZ health topic. He doesn't agree with Dr. Esselstyn, and he doesn't agree, and it's not agreeing with Dr. Esselstyn. Esselstyn just presents the science. So what they're really saying is he doesn't agree with the science and all that sort of thing, but he says some really interesting things in this book about whatever. Do you want to read it and tell me what you think? And the answer is almost always no, and the reason is there's some notable exceptions. I mean, we had to read and take apart Wheatbelly and make this guy out for what he is, which is a terrible author and an awful scientist. I mean, he's either the worst doctor on the planet or he knows better and he deliberately deceived. But in most cases, we don't have time for this garbage. But my philosophy is if you refuse to follow the science in one area, you begin to discredit yourself in other areas. So I don't have any interest in looking at it. So when I see Mercola refusing to follow the science and coconut oil and carbohydrate types and all this other nonsense he talks about, he does have the right idea about some things, but I can't talk about him. I can't use his material because the rest of the baggage that comes with it is just not right. So anyway, that's what we think about Mercola. We get asked all the time. I'm going to post this in the Health Freaks Library where you can find it if you're a subscriber. All right, that's all for today and all for the week. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you next Tuesday with more news.